And if you're wondering who's in charge of Afghanistan getting the money, and that money I just mentioned, the $697 million is on top of, and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Tèrrør1sts Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden, who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan.
The $40 million a week that comes on the airplane and comes into Afghanistan. So the plane comes in weekly. The amount of money on the plane weekly is $43 million to $87 million. But one thing I want Americans to understand is in that bucket of the $40 million we send each week, we are paying basically welfare to the Taliban martyrs' families. So every Taliban member who died during the war with us, the U.S. government is paying them a stipend, the family. So our families of Americans who died there aren't getting squat, but we are paying Taliban families for basically dying while attacking us.
Whoa.
Yes, we're funding that.
This is just enraging.
And you know, I asked a couple of people that question straight out, like, do you not think this is not ethically correct? And actually one person gave me an answer of, well, it'll stop them from joining ISIS. I'm like, the Taliban guy's already dead. Like they give you these bullshit excuses as to why they're funding like our enemy.
USAID was created through executive order in 1961 by President Kennedy, long having lost and strayed from its mission, lost its direction. Even the Clinton administration tried unsuccessfully to reform it. And we spend, I don't know, somewhere between $40 and $50 billion annually on this organization. And with the things that you hear, well, many of us, probably most of us in this room, agree with projecting America's power for the good of all the world around the globe. Quite honestly, if our enemies were asked to design a foreign aid program that would actively undermine the United States of America at maximum cost to the taxpayer, they would be hard-pressed to create a scheme more effective than USAID. That's shocking to say, but I just, it's, look, let's just go to a couple things here. We left Afghanistan, and I'll characterize it as left in August of 2021. August of 2021. So the Taliban's in charge. Taliban threatens the lives of the NGO personnel distributing USAID. They claim credit for USAID distribution. They interfere with the distribution of USAID aid. They tax the beneficiary of the aid. They tax the delivery service. They steal the food commodities. They divert the funds. They extort citizens for protection for USAID aid. They create sham procurement schemes, and they threaten the lives of those who oppose those schemes. Now, that all occurred before August of 2021, when we were there. Now, you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You could just read the Taliban is classified, and if you don't know, the Taliban's in charge of Afghanistan. They're classified as a specially designated global terrorist organization by OFAC. So post-2021, so this is last year, 2024, we spent $697 million of the taxpayers' dollars in Afghanistan, including $534,719,000 in change from USAID in Afghanistan. I don't know what we think we're going to change in Afghanistan. We lost 22,000, lost or wounded 22,500 Americans in Afghanistan over the course of our term there in the war, spending over $2 trillion. We're just going to keep on spending because somehow we think it's going to get better. And if you're wondering who's in charge of Afghanistan getting the money, and that money I just mentioned, the $697 million is on top of, and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Tèrrør1sts Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden, who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan, because Pakistan's right next door. USAID spent $840 million in the last 20 years on Pakistan's education-related program. It includes $136 million to build 120 schools, of which there is zero evidence that any of them were built. Why would there be any evidence? The Inspector General can't get in to see them. But you know what? We doubled down and spent $20 million from USAID to create educational television programs for children unable to attend the physical school. Yeah, they can't attend it because it doesn't exist. You paid for it. Somebody else got the money. You are paying for terrorism. This has got to end. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Now that
Pop up one area in the south was the start, and after that was done, mop up in the north. The division would follow behind, occupied terrain. We would train the division in situ in defensive positions, etc. But we were never allowed to execute the entire operation. So in 1 month, we took back terrain larger than Belgium from Boko Haram. We were not allowed to finish because it came at a time when governments were in the process of changing. I think President Jonathan's government possibly saw the entire Boko Haram contract, if we call it that, almost as a last gasp in order to regain popularity. The incoming president, President Buhari, was heavily supported by a foreign government, and one of the first missions was to terminate our contract.
could you name that foreign government?
Yes, we were told it was the United States, and they had actually funded President Buhari's campaign. The campaign manager for President Buhari came from the US, and I'm not saying that the United States is bad. I understand foreign interests, but I would have thought that a threat such as Boko Haram on the integrity of the state of Nigeria ought to be actually a priority. It wasn't.
Why do you think the US would intervene to abort such operation?
Again, I can't answer that. I think that the US can answer, but what I've come to realize, that is when a government's foreign interests clash with the state's own domestic interests, conflict is bound to ensue. And those conflicts usually just continue with no end. And we can look at all the conflicts in Africa where foreign forces have come in, they've prolonged those conflicts, they haven't ended those conflicts. And the amount of money and manpower and equipment thrown at those conflicts says to me that something is wrong if no end result is achieved. And surely that end result should be to end the conflict and establish a basis for negotiations, come to an agreement, and then re-establish governance. But that's not what's happening in Africa.
How much did you charge the Nigerian government?
Well, first of all, we didn't charge the Nigerian government. And I think here that is a question the Nigerian government can answer. We were one subcontractor. So another.
I just can't understand why anybody will wake up and say that we're killing people when we're actually not doing the same. And guess what? Where the Giwa barracks you were talking about, we have all the humanitarian agencies working there. You have the UN working, local and international organizations are working. Are we saying they are complicit? There is nothing we're doing in the back. So if they don't say it, which means Amnesty International is equal, and Amnesty is equally there, so which means they're equally accusing all these other organizations of being complicit.
So just to be clear, you would be prepared to go to the ICJ in The Hague and answer these accusations?
We're not scared of anything because we don't have anything of such.
We've seen Boko Haram regroup and regroup and regroup. What is your answer to that? That you have in some way fed the insurgents?
The problem is that I think we've talked to the international community. Let's find out the funding. When they started surrendering, by the time we left, so as we speak, we have over 120,000 that have surrendered. Most of them, when you find them, they are coming with hard currencies. How did they get them? How are they funded? How did they get the training? How did they get the equipment?
What is your suspicion?
Well, maybe an international conspiracy, you don't know. Who knows? How are they be able to sustain themselves for 15 years? That is one question I think everybody should ask himself. For Nigeria to be able to hold them, and you go to Nigeria, everything seems to be working well.
You must have an idea. I mean, let's not talk about international conspiracy theories. Let's give some hard facts.
Well, I just leave it at that. I'm sure they know, and I'm sure everybody knows that these are the challenges we're facing, that needs to be addressed. So the UN need to come in to ensure that, because we need to trace the funding. How are they sustaining themselves for 15 years?
What does the UN coming in mean? What does that look like?
Track the funding. It's international flow. We don't have control over that.
Whose interest is it to see Nigeria destabilized?
Well, I don't know. You don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.